Hey everyone, we are here today. Glad that you're here along with me. Friday edition, TGIF, New Hope Radio. We want to welcome our brand new audience listening on Facebook. There's now 3 ways that you can get New Hope Radio. 1590 WARV on the AM dial. WARV.net, you can stream it online. And now Facebook at New Hope Christian Church, Swansea. So if you know anyone out of this area in other parts of the country, you think they might like the program, have them go on Facebook, New Hope Christian Church, Swansea. And I guess we'll be there, live and in person. I'll be here on Facebook Tuesday through Friday. Monday and Saturday is a pre-recorded edition of New Hope Radio. We're not live, hardly ever, never. So if we're not live, we're not on Facebook. But Tuesday through Friday, we'll be here on Facebook. And I just want to take a second. Wow, we had quite an audience yesterday on Facebook, and I don't have everybody, and if I skip your name, forgive me, because I'm not too good with Facebook. I've been off it for a long time, and I just get back on it because of the radio. I'm not really a Facebook fan. But anyway, I want to give a shout out and thank you to those that tuned in yesterday to our first broadcast. Missy in, guess what, Arizona. Joy in Pasco, Rhode Island. Kristen in Portsmouth. Janet in Easton. Noreen in Easton. Denise in Blackstone. Jennifer in Westport. Emmanuel in Fall River. Joelle in Somerset. John, East Providence. Cammie in Somerset. Dave in New Bedford. Sounds like no school announcements, huh? Sue in Bristol. Holly and Tina. They didn't really say where they were. They could have been on the moon. Sue in Bristol. Laura in Florida. All right, way to go. Donna in Westport. Jessica's at work in New Bedford. She's working and watching New Hope Radio on Facebook. Donna in Attleboro. Karen in Florida. Isn't that cool to be able to stretch out beyond this local area and bring the beautiful Word of God to people all over the country, actually all over the world. So again, if you know people that you think might enjoy the teachings of New Hope Radio, New Hope Christian Church, Swansea, because there's a lot of New Hope Christian churches. So you got to put in Swansea on Facebook and boom, we'll be there. Okay? So let's get right into this topic today. By the way, if you are listening and you want to let us know, love to hear from you. And if you have a question, type it in. And our faithful receptionist, Debbie, is waiting by her phone, by her computer, to receive your comment. Okay? All right. So we'll try to get you on the air if we can. Okay. Today, good topic, John chapter 4. We're in a series about people that Jesus met. And I think there's one thing we can all agree. Life is a rocky road. It's filled with highs and lows, peaks and valleys, highways and potholes. And we'll probably find ourselves at one of these places at one time or another in our journey. But if you notice, I put on the screen, you don't have to stay in your pothole. Yeah, we all get there, but we don't have to stay there. And we're going to see a woman, okay, she was in a pothole, but you know what? She didn't stay there. So this series, I like this series because it identifies all kinds of people with all kinds of things going on in their lives. But you know what? Jesus accepts every single one. Some of the people that Jesus met, they were in their own places in life. Some a valley, another a pothole. Yeah, some were on a mountain. Today, Jesus will meet a woman who's stuck by the side of the road. Man, her life is like not moving, going nowhere. It's like she ran out of gas. You know, when someone's life is going nowhere, it's because they lack the fuel to move. And you know what that fuel is? Hope. I talk about hope a lot. It's even in the name of our church. Why? Because hope is so important. We worship a God of hope. He gives us hope. And He wants us to have hope. Because without hope, we're going nowhere. With hope, man, we can go anywhere. So today, Jesus is going to meet a woman, and He's going to give her hope. Now, we're going to find the story in John chapter 4. Jesus and His boys have been traveling, actually walking, because they walked everywhere they went, and they came to a well. And Jesus sent the disciples to a store in town to buy lunch. So we pick it up in verse 3, John chapter 4. He left Judea, and he went away into Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. Now, he went through Samaria because that was the shortest route from Judea to Galilee in the north. And it says that he came to a city in Samaria called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. It means that Jacob dug the well. So Jesus, being wearied from his journey, he was sitting by the well, and it was about the 6th hour. That's noontime. 6 o'clock in the morning is the first hour. 6 hours later, it brings us to 12 o'clock. Noontime. Well, you know what happens at noontime? The sun is directly overhead. It's like straight up, coming right down. It is hot. And a lot of people don't do much at noontime because it's so hot. Something happened that was strange at the well. But yet it wasn't strange. You know what happened? Verse 7. There came a woman of Samaria to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." Now, it was strange that a woman would come to the well at the hottest time of the day. Because why? Water pots are heavy. And when the sun is straight overhead and it's 12 o'clock, noontime, it's just something people didn't do. They would go for water early in the morning and in the evening when it was cooler. But here comes this woman, and she's coming at 12 noon, and that was strange, but it's not strange when you understand why. Why did she come at 12 noon? She was a woman stuck at the side of the road with no progress in sight. She was a woman that we're going to see basically didn't have much of a life going for her. In verse 9, the woman came to the well and saw Jesus, and Jesus said, "Give me a drink." And she said, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink since I'm a Samaritan?" Because the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Now, why is it the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along? They didn't like each other. And why is that? They were at odds with one another for hundreds of years. Originally, the Samaritans were Jewish people, but they were conquered by the Assyrians, and they were deported into Assyria. And they intermarried with the Assyrians, and therefore they lost their Jewish heritage. The remaining true Jews no longer accepted them as Jewish, and not only that, they hated them for what they had done. So Jesus answered and said to her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is who says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you'd ask him, and he'd give you living water." Wow, what's Jesus saying? He's saying, yeah, I asked you for water, but if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for real water. He's trying to get her to discover who he is. He doesn't want to tell her who he is. He wants her to discover it for herself. And that's pretty important. Because there are truths in life that cannot just be accepted. They must be discovered by oneself. Our younger generation today, the millennials, they are a generation that wants to discover their own truth. My son is a millennial, and he's at a point in his life, and he's a great kid, and I love him. He's at a point in his life where he's rethinking a lot of things about life. Now, I'm thankful that he's saved and he knows Christ, but he's rethinking a lot of things. And you know what he said to me one day? He said, "Everything I believe is what you told me, but I want to discover some things for myself." And I'm like, well, that makes sense. Okay. Because you see, when it comes to truth, you want to own it. So what I'm saying today is be patient with the younger generation. In my generation, when we grew up in the 50s, we just like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, we accepted it. That was it, or you get smacked in the head. But nowadays, it's different. So we have to accept them where they are And yes, when they do find out truth for themselves, I think they'll have a better handle on it. And that's what Jesus is doing with this woman. He could say, listen, I'm the Messiah. I can give you better water than this. But he's like, no, he's baiting her. He wants her to discover for herself who he is. So Jesus turns the natural conversation into a spiritual conversation. But she's still thinking naturally. She's not really like on board yet with him. And she said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with. And the well is deep. Where do you get this living water? She's thinking natural living water. And that makes sense. You know why? Because to the Jewish people, living water, you know what it was? It was running water. They considered running water living water. And it was even better than well water. Even though the well water was good and cold and clean, living water was like moving. It was a rushing river. And that was alive. It was living water. And she's thinking, wait a minute, this is a well. You've got no bucket. Where are you going to get running water? Or where are you going to get living water? Now, Jesus could have smacked the rock and water would have come out if he wanted to. But obviously, he didn't. Okay? So in verse 12, she said to him, you're not greater than our father Jacob, are you? No, little does she know. He gave us this well. He's the one that dug the well. And he drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle. You can't get running water from a well. Can't do it. But you see, when you have no hope, you have no spiritual insight. Oh, I like that. When you have no hope, you have no spiritual insight. You only think naturally when you feel hopeless. You don't think spiritually. Because hope comes from spiritual insight. The people that I know that seem to be hopeless most of the time, and when I say hopeless, I mean, without hope, they're just like pessimistic and down and not full of life. You know, they all have one thing in common. They have no spiritual insight. And if you have no spiritual insight, you know what? You can't get out. Because hope comes from spiritual insight. So that's why she's still thinking naturally. She's still speaking naturally. Even though Jesus is trying to turn the conversation spiritually. Well, they continue to talk to each other about water. And when she asked Jesus for that living water, Jesus said to her, now, this is like, I don't know, it's funny, not ha-ha funny, but it's just funny like Jesus wants her to ask for water, she does, and then he changes the conversation. She says, okay, give me this living water. And you know what Jesus says to her? Go call your husband. I don't know, I don't mean to laugh. I never laughed before when I read this. Go call your husband and come here. What did he do? Well, she started questioning living water. She was getting spiritual. And you know what Jesus did? He stabbed her right in the heart. Like, oh. He stabbed her right in the heart when he said to her, go call your husband. You know what came to her mind? Failure, let down, heartache, all of that revived in her. I'll bet all negative emotions, negative feelings revived in this woman when Jesus said, go call your husband. You know, the Bible tells us in Psalm 34, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I'll tell you what, sometimes God has to break our heart so he can draw near. Don't think a broken heart is by accident. God will do it so he can draw near. So Jesus said, go call your husband. And defensively, she said, I'm not married. That's a good cover-up. And Jesus said to her, that's right, you're not married. But You've been married 5 times. And now you're living with a guy. So I think unless she was a terrible cook, I would rather think that she was on a search for happiness that never ended well. Every search, every husband left her with less hope. Think about it. 5 attempts at happiness, and they all failed. And now she's giving up, so she just settles for a life without a commitment. I'll settle for a guy. You know what? Marriage doesn't work for me. So I'm gonna settle for a relationship where there's no commitment. That's why sometimes people say, well, why do we have to get married? We love each other. Because marriage means commitment, that's why. There's no commitment apart from marriage. The door's always open. Anybody can leave on a whim. You're only assuming commitment. But when you get married, you're making a profession of commitment. So ladies, don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. If he's not committed, don't do it. You're just wasting the best years of your life. So she's giving up on a settled life. She's giving up on a life of commitment because 5 times it failed her. But you know what? Living with somebody offers no security. A life without security is a life without hope. So she's living with no hope. Like I said, she's stuck by the side of the road. She's not making any progress in her life. Her life is status quo, stagnant, going nowhere. She's at a well, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and all the women are home. Why? Because the women want nothing to do with her. She's got no friends. The other ladies come at early morning and early evening. She can't. Why? Because she's the talk of the town. They gossip about her. Oh, that one. So she lives a very lonely life. And to make matters worse, it's a life without hope. But there's good news. Oh, the story ends so well. She begins to reflect spiritually. See, Jesus stabbed her in the heart, right? All of this brokenness began to revive. But now she's thinking spiritually. And she said to Jesus, ooh, I think you may be a prophet. She's starting to connect with him now. She's thinking on another wavelength, not about water. Now she's thinking, oh, he must be a prophet. You know, there are 2 revelations in Christianity. There's number 1, the revelation of God. That's important. But number 2, the revelation of ourselves. And we need both. We need to know who God is, but you know what? We need to know who we are. And I think sometimes we only complete half the deal. Got a lot of Christians, they're on a search looking for God, but really they're afraid to discover who they are. Because what they discover might not be that great. Or they don't want to face certain things about themselves. But we need both revelations. We need the revelation of God, and we also need the revelation of ourselves. So although she was stuck in life by the side of the road, she still had that little spark that the Messiah would come one day. Because the woman said to Jesus in verse 25, I know that Messiah is coming. He who was called Christ. Here's a woman, I would say, that's a believer. She's not a pagan. She's a believer. She's waiting for the Messiah, and he's coming. He's called the Christ. She knows all of that. And she said, oh, when that one comes, he's going to tell us everything. We'll know what we need to know. And then Jesus, he closed the deal. He said to her, I who speak to you am he. I'm the one. What a revelation. This conversation has made a 180. And she discovered that she was in the presence of Christ. And you know what happened right at that moment? You won't believe it. It happens all the time. At this point, the disciples came back. Do you ever notice when you're making progress with somebody spiritually, the phone rings, or there's a knock at the door, or there's always some kind of interruption? You know, you're witnessing to someone, sharing your faith, helping them, and then something comes along to interfere with the whole thing. That happens a lot. And this lady is making great progress with Jesus, and boom, the disciples show up. And the Bible says, oh, they were amazed that he was speaking with a woman, because, you know, in those days, in that culture, men and women don't speak to each other in public. And her being a Samaritan, and Jesus being Jewish, it's like, oh no, man, that's a double taboo. But nobody said to him, what do you seek, or why do you speak with her? They just kind of mused it over in their mind, but nobody approached Jesus and talked to him. And what a contrast between the two verses. In verse 26, she has hope returning to her heart. In verse 27, the disciples extinguish her hope just about. They pooped the potty. Every potty has a pooper. And they came and they pooped the potty. Something was going on that was good. And it wasn't their fault. They came back with lunch. But I'll tell you what, something like we've been saying in the series, when you meet Jesus, things change. Like we saw with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus' life changed when he met Jesus. The disciples, their lives changed. Legion, he was cast out of that poor man, and that guy's life changed. And now we have the woman at the well. So what happened when the disciples came back? The woman left her water pot. She went into the city, and she said to the men, come see a man who told me all the things I've done. Could this be the Christ? Now, you know what she didn't say? She didn't say, oh, come and see a man that told me everything I did. I found the Christ. I discovered the Christ. You know why she didn't say that? Because they would have been like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, sure, lady, okay. You can't tell these guys that. You know why? Because you can't tell men anything. They know it all. Men know everything. You can't tell them anything. That's why there's more women in church than men. Because men know it all, right? So she's very smart. She said, oh, could this be the Christ? And the men are probably like, oh, okay, you stay here. We'll go there. We'll check it out. And we'll come back and we'll let you know if he's the Christ. You know, like all these macho guys. So she said that because she was amazed by Jesus' ability to see into her innermost being. Like what David said in Psalm 139, even before there's a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You know it all. David's amazed at what God knows about his life. He is God. The woman was amazed at what Jesus knew about her. He is God. One time a little girl heard Charles Spurgeon preach. Charles Spurgeon is the prince of preachers in the 1800s in England and London. And she said to her mother when it was over, Mother, how does he know what goes on in our house? And you probably had that feeling too sitting in church. It's like, wow, how does he know? Well, God knows, that's how. He doesn't know, but God knows. And God gives the preacher the words to speak to you, to meet you right where you are. So yesterday, remember we talked about, or the other day, sharing your story. Everybody has a story. Well, that's what this woman's doing. She's sharing her story. She said, oh, come see a man who told me all the things I've done. This is not the Christ, is it? And then the men came out to see Jesus and the disciples. And the disciples said to Jesus, Master, we've got some food. Eat, eat, eat. And you know what Jesus said to them? He said, well, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Jesus is like, I get so full just doing what God has given me to do. Serving God fills me up. Serving God satisfies me. So think about it. If your life is empty, fill it up with some kind of service for the kingdom of God. And then Jesus said to them, do you not say that there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? In other words, you sow the seed in the spring, you harvest it in the fall. He said, oh, but I say to you, lift up your eyes, look on the fields. They are white for the harvest. And I bet Jesus was looking out. Here come the men from the town. And they all wore white robes. And they looked like a field that was ready for harvesting. And because of this event in verse 41, many more believed because of his word. Many more believed. It didn't stop with the woman. And you know what happened? The Samaritans asked Jesus to stay with them. And you know what he did? He stayed. 2 more days. I'm like, wow. That was unheard of. Jesus is Jewish. They're Samaritans. He stayed in their town. He ate their food. He fellowshiped with them. And then he continued his journey to Galilee. And the whole town was blessed because of this woman. A woman who thought she would live the rest of her life stuck by the side of the road with no future, no gas, no hope. But when she met Jesus, everything changed. And what happened to her can happen to anyone who's willing to, number one, see God, and number two, see themselves. You got to have both. And maybe that's why some people don't get as far with God as they'd like to, because they're not yet looking at themselves. You got to see who you are as well as know who God is. Hey, that's it for today. Thanks for coming along. We'll be back next week. Jesus is going to meet the Roman centurion. And he, just like this woman drew hope out of Jesus, what does the Roman centurion represent? We'll see that next week. Join us here Sunday at New Hope as we continue in our series, Jesus, Hope for the Future. Christ is our rock. And you can stream the services, all you Facebook people that are watching, that are far away. You can stream the service at newhopecc.tv. And we'll stream 9 and 11 a.m. live and in person. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.